Hi everyone. Today, we are diving into the heartwarming tale of Tricki, a lovable dog whose story teaches us the importance of proper care and balance. Let's get started. Tricki was a small, fluffy, and adorable dog. He lived with a rich lady named Mrs. Pumphrey. She loved Tricki so much that she gave him everything he wanted, from chocolate to fancy food and snacks all day long. Can you guess what happened? Tricki became really fat and lazy. He didn't run or play anymore. All he did was eat, sleep, and lie around. One day, Mrs. Pumphrey got very worried because Tricki was looking sick. He was so fat that he couldn't even walk properly. He seemed tired all the time. So, she called Dr. Herriot, the vet, to check on Tricki. When Dr. Herriot saw Tricki, he knew what the problem was. Tricki wasn't sick from a disease. He was sick because he was eating too much and wasn't exercising. The doctor told Mrs. Pumphrey that Tricki needed to stay with him for a few days at his surgery, a clinic for animals, so that he could help Tricki get better. At first, Mrs. Pumphrey didn't want to send Tricki away. She loved him so much and thought he would feel sad without her. But she cared about Tricki's health, so she agreed. Dr. Herriot took Tricki to his clinic. Tricki's time at the surgery. When Tricki arrived at the clinic, Dr. Herriot didn't give him any food for the first 2 days. Can you imagine? Just water and rest. At first, Tricki looked sad and tired, but then something amazing happened. He started feeling lighter and better. On the 3rd day, Tricki started showing interest in the other dogs at the clinic. These dogs were healthy, playful, and full of energy. They ran around, played games, and ate only healthy food. Tricki watched them and slowly started joining in. He played, ran, and exercised with his new friends. And guess what? He loved it. Tricki didn't eat chocolate or fancy snacks anymore. He ate the simple, healthy food Dr. Herriot gave him, and he started losing weight. He became more active and happy. Mrs. Pumphrey's reaction. Meanwhile, Mrs. Pumphrey missed Tricki a lot. She thought he was lonely and sad, so she sent expensive food, toys, and even clothes for Tricki to the clinic. But Dr. Herriot didn't give those things to Tricki. He knew Tricki needed to stay on a healthy routine. After 2 weeks, Dr. Herriot called Mrs. Pumphrey and told her that Tricki was ready to go home. When Mrs. Pumphrey came to pick him up, she couldn't believe her eyes. Tricki looked fit, slim, and so energetic. He ran to her, wagging his tail and jumping with joy. Mrs. Pumphrey was overjoyed and thanked Dr. Herriot, saying it was a triumph of surgery, a great success. Moral of the story. This story teaches us an important lesson: too much love and care, especially when it involves unhealthy habits, can sometimes harm someone we care about. We should always think about what's best for their health and happiness. Just like Tricki, we all need a balance of good food, exercise, and rest to stay healthy and happy. If you like this video, please like, subscribe and share it.